everyone, my name is Sarah Beth, and I just finished reading Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. Please forgive me if I mispronounced that. This is actually book of the month for August, second one I picked up this month, and it was published this month as well. I think this book is just okay. It's about 375 pages, and I'm very aware that I'm not its key demographic or audience. I think that the author has a lot of passion for her culture, and it definitely shows. But due to that, she kind of expects you to know a lot more than the general audience might know. For instance, it took me a long time to figure out what DR was, as in Dominican Republic. And I also just wasn't very sure as to what was going on in a lot of the novel because a lot of it is in Spanish, and I do not speak said language. Not that I don't mind some mixtures with language, it's just that there was so much page to page that it often left me feeling like I was missing a lot of the novel, which I was. There were times that I translated, but obviously when reading translations, a lot of it gets lost within, context. So you have, within culture and one's understanding of certain similes or metaphors, and then coming to, obviously, US culture, a lot of it gets lost. For me, I personally just felt that it alienated me from the story. I really tried to be invigorated by what was being said, but it just felt kind of bland because I was missing so much. There was also the fact that the women characters are portrayed as very strong, and it's a very women-centric novel, obviously. And it kind of made me sad that all of the men were disregarded and portrayed as one-dimensional characters and portrayed as ultimately unimportant, and that their roles within the family were few with just almost no interaction. So basically the book centers around this family with a matriarch who is deceased at the beginning of this novel, and then her children. She has four girls that are all obviously in their twilight years, and then one son named Samuel. He is barely ever mentioned except in passing. You never see any passages about him, and so it really focuses on these four sisters and their children. Except for the male children, once again, they are kind of disregarded, which is sad. There's a lot within this book which I just really wish touched upon different characters. I think there's one really nice love story that occurs, but I feel that it was essentially thrown aside because it didn't match with the message of the book, kind of saying you do not need males, which, I mean, it's a girl power novel, but I do think that it definitely kind of spurns half the civilization. It just didn't feel whole. I felt that it was more of a book written in anger than in love, and I think it was supposed to be a book full of love when really it just treats males as these evil sorcerers that can only do wrong by the women in the family. Because for instance, one of the sisters, Matilda, she's the oldest, she cannot bear children, and so she has married this man who is essentially, he's a slut, and he sleeps around, and she knew this on the wedding night, and she kind of just has this obsession and attachment to him, and she stayed with him her whole life. She's in her 70s now, and by end of the novel, she finally leaves him because he got someone pregnant and all the shame. But you never really get to hear much about him other than his bad qualities. Obviously, she's staying with him for a reason, but it's not explained as to why. There's also, like the love story I mentioned earlier between Yadi and Ant, short for Anthony. He's kind of shown as one of the few positive male characters in this book, but even then, he's been to prison for 18 years. And in the end, he's disregarded despite the fact that they spent their childhood together and they loved each other, and she kind of uses him to sleep with him. He's ultimately the one in the wrong, and it feels sad that a lot of these males are just used throughout the novel. I think that the writing itself, if I could actually read Spanish, would be a lot nicer. I did have a few translations or someone try to explain to me certain passages, And what was explained was beautiful. And I was like, wow, I really wish I could have actually read that. And so I think that if you don't know Spanish, you will feel left out. I don't think the prose is beautiful because I couldn't read most of it. On each page, there was at least a little bit of Spanish. So it was kind of like the difference between if you're reading Jane Eyre, and in the novel, she uses quite a bit of French, but not too much. Like in Jane Eyre, there might be a passage or two of French, but it's, maybe like once every few chapters you'll get a little bit of French. This was every single page was just saturated with all this culture, beautiful culture that I wish I could have read, and I was not able to. Honestly, this book kind of reminds me of a book called The Secret History of Witches. It came out relatively recently, which I would prefer that over this, even though that book wasn't necessarily my choice. I felt that at least it gave credit to all of the characters. That you could see, oh wow, there's room for both sexes in a book. We're not just like it's definitely a book about women and female empowerment, which I enjoy. But it also included the fact that you can use the other half use the other half of our species, which is a little bit nicer than what was happening here. It felt like this whole book was just somebody being angry but wanting to show their culture, and it made me very sad. So maybe don't pick up this book of the month. I also found a typo in this book on page 221. Instead of saying her, it says he, and that definitely upset me. So, publishers, get it together. Don't have typos in a book that's part of such a huge company. I mean, I do think that that's a little bit unprofessional to have typos in your book that you're sending out to so many people, and it's such a huge grammatical error. So be careful about that, and thanks for watching.